So just to lead us off, and we have just a few minutes for questions, but as we talk about animal agriculture and staying united, and so we've got 4 people up here. We understand doing the right thing, staying committed to that. We have a mission. What do we need to do when producers don't do the right thing? What's the right way to handle that and communicate that? As we're talking about communication, how do we handle that out to the consumers and out to the public?
I'll start because the beef sector is not vertically integrated, so it presents more of a challenge. When you have, like Costco, our neighbors are building 6 poultry barns, you're answering all the way to the end right there, and they own the birds. You're basically custom feeding them, and so you are directly answering to the buyer. Well, they own them, so you wouldn't put that investment in those barns because you're going to lose it if you lose the contract. And so you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, that you're out as an investment. And so I think for the vertically integrated systems, it's fairly simple. You just stop doing business with them, and then it's not good. On the cattle side, the same thing can happen because even though we're not vertically integrated, we have a limited amount of processors to buy our cattle. So in Nebraska, there are 4 main companies that we have to pick from to buy our cattle. And the last thing we want to do is limit our options of who will buy them. And once you are distrusted, you don't get that back. And so then you have many millions of dollars invested not only in the machinery and the land development of being able to operate. You are not trusted as a person, and I have to say the character part of that still is very strong in the farming community of being a trustworthy person. And so even if economically it would be devastating, I think personally, in the 80s was tough, and we saw a lot of death because farmers couldn't handle that economic loss. But the trustworthy factor of your character is equally as important. And I think as long as we maintain that, there has to be accountability at some point to test and to do testing to hold us accountable. We have to have that in place. But if it doesn't start with because we want to do what's right in the first place, it's going to be really hard as we get more employees involved to make sure they are doing what's right because it is right.
Karen, you're a past president of the National Pork Board and been involved in some marketing committees. Anything to add to that?
There are processes in place. It's been talked about the on-farm audits, our on-farm assessments, the certification programs. But then when we've got producers who do, or supposedly because of a presented or misinterpreted steps and videos, things like that, there are review panels with broad range of industry expertise to review those. And as Joan said, we've got limited number of our farm customers of where we can to sell our livestock, and they're the middleman in between the consumer and the farm as a supplier. So they have programs and rely on those other industry steps that are already in place and have been developed and put into place over the years. So there are processes in place to deal with, should a bad actor case come to light.
Yeah, Brett.
If this on, one thing I'd like to say as far as the dairy producer, I was a Dairy Farmers of America member, and they had protocols in place to whereas if for some reason you had to use an antibiotic and it slipped through your test at the farm and it was tested positive at the processing plant, they would have to discard that whole load of milk. And so what the deal was, it's kind of like a 3 strikes, you're out. First time they would let it slide. The second time that happened, you had to pay for half of that load of milk, and the third time you had to do it was you'd have to pay for the whole load of milk, and also you would have to go to before a panel and explain why this happened. So they've got protocols in place to prevent things like that reaching the food chain.
I think it's important to remember that, I mean, no one intentionally sets out to do that within the industry. It can happen, and like you mentioned in your discussion, Joan, if you find a mistake, find it and correct it, and so it goes down to the people you're working with on there. Another note, go ahead, Neville.
Yeah, we're close to time, so we need to be close to wrapping up. Yep.
So I was going to say, just maybe one last question for the panel. You're all very passionate about what you do. Maybe close with something that you're proud of on your operation, or some form of communication you've been doing to get your story out.
We have as many tours as we can provide the time for and the request for, and perhaps the best compliment I've ever been paid was a group that was there, and we were talking about how we doctor and how we record on our records and how that all works, and a gentleman raised his hand and he said, "You act like you have nothing to hide." And I was blown away by it, and I said, "I don't." But that's a perception out there that we are hiding, and so for me, that stands out, like in all the things I do for advocacy, as a very key moment.
Great.
As a past president of the National Pork Board, and there, over the years, statewide and nationally, of all the programs, the proactive approaches that the pork industry has developed and set into everyday methods and practices and good production practices on our farms. I'm a small producer. I utilize and rely on the same science as the large vertically integrated farms producers, and many people don't realize that, but I rely on the same science, the same daily steps. I just don't have as many barns as some other producers do, but I share what I do. I've gone out, we've had tours in the past, and as far as much as biosecurity will allow at times, I've brought people right outside of our barns and realized that you can't smell those barns 5 miles away, barely standing right outside the barns on a hot summer day. The food safety. I've been involved in so many of the committees, whether it's promotion or research or producer education on the state level and national level. Again, that proactive approach of our industry and our organizations has helped me to convey to consumers, and whether it be at Sunday church coffee hour or in front of a group like this, or to high school students or college students. So, there's opportunities out there, and as a producer, I encourage, my family and others to, as the 2% out there, we have to share what we do and what we do every day. So.
Thank you, Brett.
One thing that I can look back on and be proud of is here a couple of years ago, we hosted a dairy farm tour for children that were attending a Association of Family Physicians convention that was about 50 miles from us. And so we set up the tour for that, and we're working with kids anywhere from the age of 6 up to 16. We got them out on the dairy farm to let them see how the cows were milked, how they were taken care of, how we take care of the baby calves. And then we kind of had, I requested this, to have a post survey done, pre-survey and post-survey of what, the kids had learned there. And I think one of the biggest comments that most of them made was that they were really glad that they went. They had no idea, and they would much rather go to something like that and see than maybe like a science museum or an art museum or something of that nature. But they were really pleased with what they got.
Great.
Well, I'm not a past president of the National Pork Board, but I'm a past president of the AAAP, American Association of Avian Pathologists, and I'm pretty proud of what we did as far as working closely with AVMA to bring this issue, move this issue forward, and the response from our industry as far as stewardship efforts, which are reflected in no violations of residue tolerances in poultry, in any kind of poultry for at least 10 years, none. So, I mean, that's something you can be proud of. Likewise, the adoption of new technologies. If you think about it, since I've been here, when we adopted enclosed nipple drinker systems as opposed to open type drinkers, we caught probably antimicrobial use in probably 75% right, just by one single measurement. And if you add to that the improvements in nutrition management as far as ventilation, automation of housing, I think our industry can be proud of what they've done. I mean, and look at the results in terms of growth rate, yield, etc. I mean, it's made poultry continue to be really the most available protein in the world.
Thank you. Let's give our panel a round of applause.